Well, maybe still trickling in here, but it's time. So welcome to the U.S. Industrial Resurgence panel here. When oil was $100 and natural gas was $3 or even $4, the U.S. petrochemical industry was really competitive in global markets. And so there were a lot of petroleum plants that were, or petrochemical plants that were planned and announced and started. Now, of course, with oil at 45, our competitive edge has sort of narrowed a little bit, but it's still there. And so we have three very eminent speakers to talk about what the current state of U.S. industrial resurgence is. And I'll just introduce them right now. And what we're going to do is everybody will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the very end for everyone. So we will first have Peter Balash. Peter is Acting Director, Office of Strategic Analysis and Planning at DOE's National Energy Technology Lab here in Pittsburgh. He's followed energy markets, energy security, and technology issues since 2002, focusing on market and technology interactions across the entire energy value chain. And he's been active in the USAEE since 2001. Martha Moore is Senior Director for Policy Analysis and Economics at the American Chemistry Council. She analyzes the impact of various policy initiatives and energy trends on the chemical industry, and in particular, recent developments in shale. Martha has worked on chemical industry issues for more than 15 years and is an authority on the market dynamics for the chemical industry and its end-use customer industries. And then finally, we have Tom Duesterberg. Tom recently retired from his position as Executive Director of the Manufacturing and Society in the 21st Century program at the Aspen Institute. He was formerly President and CEO of the Manufacturers Alliance, and among many other positions, his previous positions include Director of the Washington Office of the Hudson Institute and Assistant Secretary for International Economic Policy at the U.S. Department of Commerce. His commentary and analysis spans manufacturing, economic performance, globalization, and many related policy issues. So I will ask Peter to come up and start us off. And let me see if I can get his... Oh, Peter, I'm sorry, it's Martha. I'm sorry. Sorry, I don't look too much this way.
Thanks, Renee. And thanks to the conference organizers for inviting me to come here. I haven't been to Pittsburgh in a very long time, so it's a real pleasure to be back here. And I should let you know that my very first speaking opportunity was at one of these conferences. It was, I think, in Albuquerque ages ago. In fact, I think I was on the panel with Renee. That's when I met Renee. So it's a delight to be here and to offer a consumer perspective on how shale gas development has really revolutionized our industry in addition to energy production in the United States. So as most of you probably know, the chemical industry is very energy intensive. Last year, the chemical industry consumed 5.8 quadrillion BTUs of energy in all forms, both for feedstock and for fuel and power. It is the largest manufacturing user of natural gas. So energy and natural gas in particular are paramount to this industry. This chart here is showing the total cost of energy as a percentage of the total cost to produce about 25 chemical products. These are our major chemical products used. Chlorine uses almost no fossil fuels directly, but 40% of the production cost of chlorine is electricity, which natural gas is used to fuel electricity, so there's an advantage in chlorine now. I'm going to talk today primarily about ethylene. It's a building block chemical. The United States produces about 25 million metric tons of ethylene per year. It's used in a number of products. In fact, the gentleman from the Marcellus Shale Coalition yesterday showed one of our charts and how useful ethylene is in our economy. About 70% of the cost of producing ethylene is energy cost, and feedstock is a large portion of that. So shale gas has really shifted the competitiveness of the petrochemical industry. In the US and Canada, historically it's been cheaper to crack ethane, propane, and other natural gas liquids. It's a lower capital cost, plus the availability in this region of the world has made it such that our capital stock in the petrochemical sector is predominantly natural gas liquids cracking. However, our competitors in Western Europe and in Asia, they primarily crack naphtha, which is a petroleum-based feedstock. There's a correlation between feedstock and energy prices, and so feedstock costs are driven by the relative cost of oil to natural gas, and I've got some charts on that in a second. So 10 years ago, the US was near the top of the global cost curve for producing ethylene. Natural gas costs were extremely high, and it really priced a lot of US producers out of the market. At the same time, there was a wave of low-cost capacity that was coming online in the Middle East that was further displacing US production. However, if you fast forward to the last several years, the US has emerged as a low-cost producer of ethylene. We're just ahead now of the Middle East, and the cost position in the Middle East is expected to become less balanced. They have been using ethane, but their ethane allocations are being constrained. So new projects going forward in the Middle East will be using liquefied petroleum gases or naphtha going forward. So their cost position will change over the next few years. In the US, the share of ethylene production from natural gas liquids has increased from 59% in 2005 to 92% last year. Lower oil prices have certainly eroded some competitiveness. It has flattened the cost curve for ethylene, but the US has retained its competitive position. We're still feedstock advantaged. I'm gonna grab my water real quick. Thank you. In this chart, looking at the difference between naphtha and ethane prices, that's the real key to petrochemical competitiveness. So again, our competitors in Europe and Asia are using naphtha, and we're using ethane predominantly. And so you can see that the naphtha price has come down substantially. It's very highly correlated to the oil price. However, that spread, that green bar, remains high compared to its relative average over the past decade. We don't always have ethane and naphtha prices available to us. A quick proxy is looking at the oil and natural gas prices. Again, here I've priced Henry Hub in its oil equivalent just to look at the comparison, and again we see that the delta between those natural gas prices and the oil prices, and we use Brent as our benchmark. It's the international benchmark, and that is the oil price that they're looking at in Asia and Western Europe. And so as a proxy, we look at that ratio of the price of oil to the price of natural gas. And we've done some analysis, and at about 7, when that ratio is about 7, if it's above 7, US Gulf Coast-based petrochemicals are relatively advantaged. When that ratio falls below 7, chemicals are relatively disadvantaged. That's an analysis that's based on relative co-product prices for other products that you get from the cracking process, the age of some of the crackers in other parts of the world, et cetera, the yields. And if you look at EIA and the futures markets, if you look at those forward prices for oil and natural gas, that ratio remains well above 7. So that competitive advantage is expected to persist, even in a lower oil price environment. This is what gets our petrochemical guys excited. This is natural gas liquids production in the US, and you can see it has absolutely surged ahead after 2007. A lot of that production is coming from this part of the country, the East Coast. Ethane, we're now looking at well over 1 million barrels per day of ethane. In fact, there's so much ethane coming out of the ground. Crackers aren't built yet, and so they're actually exporting some ethane. We're exporting ethane to Canada via pipeline right now, up to Ontario from the Marcellus region here to feed some crackers up in that part of their country. We're also exporting ethane from the Vantage pipeline from North Dakota, from the Bakken region, to the Alberta crackers in Western Canada. There are several projects underway to export ethane on large tankers to several crackers in the coastal regions of Europe. And there's a project to import US ethane into India as well to use some of that. I mentioned this part of the country. This is ethane and propane production in Pad 1, so the East Coast, primarily driven by Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, these regions here. And you can see the real surge in ethane and propane availability that has taken off. And some of this is on its way to Marcus Hook to get on tankers. Some of it's going to Canada. The chemical industry has 3 major ethane cracking, ethylene production centers that have been announced for this region of the country, and that will take some of this ethane and propane as well. We've had a surge of announced investments in U.S. chemical capacity as a result of this advantage. Beginning in about 2010, we started tracking announced chemical capacity expansions and new projects that were coming online as a result of shale gas. At the beginning of October, we're now tracking 246 individual projects valued at $153 billion. As a reference point, that's more than a third of the existing U.S. chemical capacity that's currently in place. So this is an unprecedented build-out of chemical industry capacity. Some of these projects are more likely to happen than others, especially with the lower oil price. Some projects have been delayed as a result of the lower oil prices. But we went back and we periodically go and look at the status of each of one of these projects. 8% are already complete. Again, this database we started in 2010. So some of the smaller expansion projects or switching from a naphtha to an ethane, those projects have already happened. And 28% are projects that are currently, they're still going in the ground right now. They're under construction. 58%, the majority of projects, they have not started yet. They may be talking to suppliers, doing engineering studies, et cetera. But they're still continued, they're planned, they're expected to go forward. We do have 6% of our projects that have been delayed. One of the crackers set for this region, they have announced that they're delaying their decision. So they're in that delayed category. We do have a couple of projects where we just have not been able to determine what their status is. When we do hear of a project being canceled, we remove it from the database. We've had about $10 billion worth of projects that have been canceled. I think there was one larger ethylene project. A lot of them are ammonia projects, fertilizer projects. It was smaller groups that got together and decided that they were going to take advantage of this shale gas and make ammonia, and then they couldn't get the financing or decided not to go forward. So the majority of those canceled projects are ammonia. 63% of the projects in our database are foreign or have a foreign partner. I've been with the chemical industry on and off for about 20 years, and there are companies that are coming to invest in the United States chemical industry that I had not heard of before. It's a really exciting time to be in this industry. Additionally, there are projects going forward in Canada. We heard about Canadian unconventional oil and gas, and also in Mexico. There's a huge ethylene project that's coming online in Mexico in the next quarter or two. And in addition to this, we're looking downstream. A lot of the ethylene goes into polyethylene or polyvinyl chloride. Those products are converted to the items that you see around you that are made of those materials. So the plastic projects, or the plastic processing projects, there's an expansion going on in that sector as well. And we're tracking about 500 projects there. How am I doing on time today? Okay. Oh yeah, I'm fine. Again, the lower oil price has not deterred a lot of these announced investments. We saw the oil price turn down last year, and we've continued to add projects. This is the cumulative, our database looking at it in a cumulative way, announced projects over time. And yeah, we're continuing to add projects. A lot of these projects now that are being announced in the last year or so are derivative projects. So you have an ethylene cracker that has been announced. Ethylene is not cost competitive to move around or move large distances, so you're going to build your derivatives plants close to where that ethylene is. And we're starting to hear more of those derivative projects being announced. Things like polyethylene, and materials that go into detergents and adhesives, ethylene oxide, ethylene glycol, et cetera. And the build-out is really underway. This is data from the Census Bureau, looking at the chemical industry construction spending, which now accounts for over half of the manufacturing construction. And you can see that over the last 2 or 3 years, it has risen by a factor of 5. These are that 28% with steel in the ground. This is that steel in the ground, so this is actually happening. I don't know if any of you were from the Houston area. I was down in Freeport a few months ago, and it's amazing the amount of construction. You look around and there's construction activity everywhere. This is how we see the sort of wave of investment playing out. Again, I mentioned we have seen some of those projects already come to fruition. The peak of investment we anticipate to be occurring in about 2017. That's when the height of the activity is going to occur. It becomes less certain the further out you go, whether some of those projects in that 58% actually move from the being planned to the under construction phase. The shale gas advantage is driving capacity expansion across many products in the chemical industry. From the natural gas liquids, ethane and propane, the predominant one that everybody hears about is ethylene. Capacity could grow by more than half. And then the ethylene derivatives, polyethylene, vinyls, ethylene glycol, which goes into fibers and adhesive materials, ethylene oxide, etc. Then there are ethylene cracker co-products. When you crack naphtha, I'll move back here. When you crack naphtha, you get a good portion of ethylene. It looks about 35% ethylene. But then you also get propylene. C4s are butadiene. They're an important chemical. It goes into styrene butadiene rubber in your tires and other things. You get aromatics and some other materials. When you crack ethane, you're predominantly getting ethylene. And as our producers have moved from cracking naphtha, remember it was 59% in 2005 for cracking ethane. Now almost everybody's cracking ethane. So that has created shortages of some of these other materials. So some of the cracker co-products are now technologies to make propylene on purpose. Most propylene was made either from ethylene cracking with naphtha or from refinery streams. There's now technologies to use propane as a feedstock to make propylene on purpose. And I think there's one project actually that's going to make butadiene on purpose from butane, from these natural gas liquids. Then there's complementary projects, chlor-alkali. Chlorine is advantaged because of the natural gas that goes into the electricity production to split that salt atom. Chlorine is paired with ethylene to make polyvinyl chloride. There's a couple other steps that I'm skipping, but those are some advantaged molecules that have resulted from the shale revolution. Industrial gases. There's a lot of industrial gas development going along the Gulf Coast, especially where a lot of this development is happening, used in various chemical products. Methane feedstock. So, that first part is the natural gas liquids. Methane is a feedstock as well. It's used in ammonia and used in methane. Used in ammonia and methanol. And then there are demand-driven products. Of the 246 projects that I've talked about, there's a handful of them that are actually sort of the other way around. They are products, it's new capacity and chemicals used in the oil and gas industry to help fracking. We've decided that those were advantaged as well. But the majority of them are projects that have a cost advantage because of shale gas. About 60% of the projects in our database are bulk petrochemicals, although some of these large cracker projects will have derivative units. We don't know the specifics of those, they were not announced. 11% are plastic resins, 20% of the projects are fertilizers. We've also got chlor-alkali and other inorganics, and about 7% in that other category. And the development is happening all over the country. About 70% of the projects are slated to go along the US Gulf Coast, and that's the traditional hub of petrochemical manufacturing here in the United States. Although this region is expected to have at least 3 crackers are announced for this region, plus a number of derivative projects and other projects as well. We've got a couple of markers over on the West Coast. This is interesting. These are methanol projects that are being built by Chinese investors for export to China to fuel their methanol to olefins industry. So they're going to indirectly import shale gas from the United States in that way. And then the ones in the Midwest, there are a couple of ethylene projects in North Dakota. The rest of them are fertilizer projects in the Midwest region. Much of the new capacity is export-oriented. We had this analysis done by Nexent last year, so it's a little bit dated. But the U.S. trade surplus for these selected chemicals is expected to more than double by 2030 as a result of shale gas. Those light blue bars, that's the C2 chain, that's ethylene and the derivatives, expanding as those new projects come online. Right now, the U.S. has a deficit in C1 chemistry, and methane, methanol, ammonia. Before the last decade, when natural gas prices were so high, I think something like 50% of the ammonia capacity in the United States shut down, and almost all of the methanol shut down. So we've been importing those materials. So the new capacity is going to sort of offset the dependence that we've got there, but we will still be importing C1 chemistry. At the end of the day, the U.S. is going to be capturing market share away from our global competitors in Western Europe and Japan. This is showing our expectations. It's basic chemicals. It's a production index comparable to the ones that the Federal Reserve produces. And we can see the U.S. really pulling away in basic chemicals. This is organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, and synthetic materials, so resins, synthetic rubber, etc. But there are several important risks to this narrative. This is a list of some of the things that are keeping us awake at night. Unpredictable energy dynamics, of course, but we've got workforce development issues. I think this is an issue not only for the chemical industry, but energy producers and other manufacturers as well, is finding the skilled labor to not only build the plants, but once they're built, to staff them. People that can use computers, computer numerically controlled processes, etc. We're looking at shortages of key equipment. Everybody's trying to build an ethylene plant at the same time. There's pressure vessels and process equipment that needs to be ordered. So there may be some shortages of that key equipment. And all of these are leading to cost escalations, wage increases, and the equipment as well. Infrastructure is something that really needs to be addressed. As we develop this story, as these new capacities come online, as we start to export, the port infrastructure, especially along the Houston Ship Channel, is inadequate at the moment to handle the volumes that are anticipated. We've got the Panama Canal opening next year, and the Port of Houston, I know, is undertaking a massive upgrade, but there's questions about the timing of when it's going to happen. In addition to the port facilities, there's transloading facilities. To export resin to Asia, they need to take it from hopper cars that come in on rail, transload it into 50-kilo bags to be put in containers. The capacity to do that step is also inadequate, so there needs to be a build out there. Market access and trade exposure. We're looking at trade agreements, the TPP and TTIP. I'm almost done. Oh, okay. And certainly environmental or other regulations affecting the license to operate either chemical plants or the feedstock, the flow of that feedstock, and market imbalances, of course. And with that, I'll finish and we can move on.
Perfect. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and I want to reiterate welcome to Pittsburgh. It's where I'm located. I need my glasses. This is far more a typical day in Pittsburgh, nice and cloudy. So I'm glad it is, so you have to pay attention to me instead of looking outside at the beautiful colors. In this area, which is the epicenter of the Marcellus drilling, especially in the liquids-rich plays, there is a sustained marketing campaign by the first mover in the Marcellus Shale in this area, Range Resources from Texas, who has flooded the airwaves with the American flag, and drilling is just the beginning as a marketing gimmick to promote the fracking and the resultant surge in natural gas production. More recently, in the downstream area, there's a new slogan that's coming up. It's called "Friends Don't Let Friends Burn Ethane." And that is near and dear to the heart of the chemical industry and also to the regional movers and shakers. So I'm going to try to complement what Martha had to say by focusing on the resurgence. I think what's going on in the Gulf Coast is more of a surge. The resurgence refers to recovering lost manufacturing, recovering lost industrial GDP over the last 15 years, thanks to the ubiquity of shale gas and associated products. I'd like to thank two members of the audience, Justin Adler and Gavin Pickapall, who work with me at NETL, for helping me out with this. Anything I say, whether ad lib or in the slides, is my opinion, and not to be confused with the Department of Energy under any circumstances. Okay. Now, we saw a similar graph, and what makes an economist working for DOE different than someone from the ACC is that I put things in terms of energy rather than in terms of oil prices. So we have the same graph that Martha showed, but it's converted to its energy basis in millions of BTUs, a nice British measure. And if anybody was at these conferences 10 years ago, we were talking about the convergence of natural gas and oil prices and how the international LNG trade was going to clear the market at $3.50 a million BTU. Well, what happened? We had 10 years of lockstep movement where oil led gas in the United States, West Texas Intermediate versus Henry Hub. And that seemed to be the case with some minor weather-driven events in 2000 and the hurricane 2005. But then we had the great oil price run-up in 07 and 08, and then the crash. The real change came after the crash. We had a warmish winter in 2006, which led to a brief interruption between oil and gas prices. But then after the crash is when the shale gas production ramped up. And once that ramped up, and at the same time there was strategic behavior in the oil market, oil prices went to $18 a million BTU, while gas hovered in the $3 to $4 range. So as a result, we've had a big divergence between natural gas and oil prices, which has led to this opportunistic development. In 2005, the United States produced about 65.5 BCF a day, and it was concentrated in Alaska, Texas, Oklahoma, Gulf of Mexico. And even though that buttons up there by Pennsylvania, that was all other states. And as you heard yesterday from Adam, they are breaking out Pennsylvania now from the all other states region. But nonetheless, we can infer the following, that the 26 BCF a day increase in natural gas production, about a 40% increase overall in 10 years in the United States, put to rest any ideas of peak natural gas. And most of that 26 BCF a day increases in Texas and the Marcellus. Texas is in the Eagle Ford, much of it is in the Barnett first, and then some associated from Eagle Ford, whereas up here it's all in the Marcellus and now lately other plays. Offsetting declines in other regions. We heard a little bit from Rusty yesterday about pipeline miles being added, and after a dearth in after the recession, we had a little bit of a dearth, but lately we've been adding more and more miles of pipeline, but also even in the Northeast, several dozen BCF a day of takeaway capacity is being planned. So we're moved from the supply through the midstream in order to get to consumption. This graph is based on EIA data. It's in trillion cubic feet. In 2005, overall gas consumption in the United States hovered a little bit over 21 TCF per year. Last year, it had risen about 6 TCF in 10 years to 27 TCF per year, with a little bit over a third of it in industrial usage, a little bit less than a third of it in electric power, the rest in space heating, and just a very modest amount in transportation. The reference case for natural gas in the AEO 2015 might surprise some that in the next 5 years it sees a decline. That is based on reference case natural gas price projections, which are quite a bit higher than the present gas price by a couple of dollars. If gas were to be $4.50 a million BTU instead of the present $2.50, then you would see displacement of gas by coal power and very little growth anywhere else. And that's why it declines to 26 TCF in 2020. But nonetheless, as coal plants retire and the gas prices remain competitive in the reference case, generally around $5 a million BTU, we see an increase of about a TCF and a half a year in an industry, and a little bit over a TCF in electric power, and a modest amount in transportation. In the high economic growth case, you see a small bump up, primarily, and it's hard to see, but if you look at the 2040 graphic, there's a little shaded pink region above the electric power and a little shaded blue region above industry. So we increase overall from today of 27 TCF to about 32 TCF, a modest 5 TCF per year increase in the next 25 years. But why would you have high economic growth? One might argue that what engenders high economic growth are low commodity prices. Low commodity prices obtain when you have a very elastic supply curve. And if the shale gas productivity trends continue, as we heard yesterday, there's much optimism in that regard, then the flatter, more elastic supply curves that are in the EIA's high resource case are likely to happen, which means that if you can make the argument, you can combine the estimates in the high economic growth case with those of the high resource case to come out with the upside for use of natural gas in the United States in the next 25 years. And that can get us to almost 40 TCF a year economy in the United States by 2040, with 4.5 TCF more of natural gas use by industry, and about 5 TCF more use by electric power. Now, not so long ago, that kind of prediction would have been laughed at, but we'll get to that in a minute. But we will skip over this because Martha talked about it, but she talked about ethane, but you also have the other NGLs, and you have the use in the chemical industry, which is industry. Propane, you can light your fires with it too, but also run motors. And butane, isobutane, and pentanes are used in the refining applications. We skip over this because we talked about it, but just to emphasize that we've had a 79–80% increase in production of natural gas liquids between 2010 and today, resulting in a cratering of natural gas liquids prices as well. All right, now I'll get to what I just mentioned. This graph shows trends in natural gas consumption in the United States from 1997 to today, with a small prediction of next year from the short-term energy outlook. The yellow line is all other consumption, is essentially the space heating demand for natural gas, incremental. The blue line is industry, green is electric power, and red is net imports, primarily from Canada. Between 1997 and 2007, you had declining industrial use of natural gas. We've had over the period, except for some bumps, an ever-increasing use of natural gas by electric power. Between 2007 and 1997, the electric power and industrial trends were in opposite direction. After that, those trends reversed, and net imports declined. So not only did both of those sectors that are relatively elastic to price increase in use, net imports decline. So that's a large increase in natural gas consumption in the United States driven by the supply side phenomenon. Now, how is that reflected in the price? The red dashed line is the Henry Hub price. Between 97 and 07, you could argue that there was a zero-sum game between electric power and industry. That as the price rose, driven by a number of factors, oil prices, the vast increase in electric power additions using gas, with that electric power was able to outbid industry and industrial use declined. That seemed to be the case and seemed to be explain some of the trepidation of some of the downstream users of natural gas with the build out of natural gas power. But because of the shale gas explosion of 26 BCF a day, now we have a concomitant increase in industrial use and electric load, all while the price has been driven down. So is that going to continue? That's the issue. Now this, Martha concentrated on chemicals. This table is a table of the top 7 energy intensive manufacturing sectors in the United States: chemicals, mineral products, paper, primary metals, textiles, wood. By themselves, they account for 78% of manufacturing use of natural gas and 18% of overall natural gas use in the United States. And at the same time, they comprise 58% of the total electricity load in manufacturing and 11% of electric load overall. That's energy intensive, so that's measured as a percentage of their cost structure. Energy consuming sectors, which include those, but also others. So here we drop textiles and add fabricated metals, food, and transportation equipment. And these 9 energy consuming manufacturing sectors account for 93% of total use of natural gas by manufacturing and 78% of total manufacturing kilowatt hours. And analogously, about 1/5 of overall natural gas consumption in the United States and 14% overall electricity consumption in the United States. So there's a lot riding on the win-win game as opposed to the zero-sum game going forward for these energy-consuming sectors. To drill down to a case study, we talked about in the, I have to say, in 14 years working at a science lab, I understand what Martha meant by C1 chemistry. So it was one of the few takeaways in my education as in the DOE. But part of that was nitrogen. And nitrogen is the basis of anhydrous ammonium fertilizers. And what we have here is a graph showing imports and exports, imports and domestic consumption of ammonia versus the prices of natural gas and the price of anhydrous ammonia. My father-in-law owns a 3,000-acre farm in Illinois, and he's highly interested in the price of anhydrous. And in the middle part of last decade, when that went up, that was a real issue to the farming belt. That gas is going up. It's ruining the export competitiveness of the grain farmers in Illinois. So what we have in 1998 was 13,800 million metric tons. I'm sorry, 13 million metric tons of ammonia in that green bar in 1998. By 2009, that had cratered to 7,720 metric tons, which was a collapse of the anhydrous industry in the United States. And why did that happen? Well, the price of natural gas in the blue line is escalating far greater than the price that they could of ammonia. So the producers of ammonia were not competitive with imports. So the purple bars expanded and the green bars retracted. Since the end of the recession, because of shale, the blue line has declined to about $4 a million BTU, and the red line is above it, which hadn't happened for well over 20 years. As a result, there's a competitiveness that's returned to ammonia, and even if some of it hasn't been built, after having a 45% decline in ammonia production in the United States, we have a 20% increase in ammonia production. So that is one example of the industrial resurgence in the U.S. And just to step back from an industry focus and get to regional, if you look at just 4 regions in the United States, the 2 that use the most energy are the Midwest and the South. The Northeast and the West are relatively not intensive in energy. Energy intensive share of U.S. GDP is a little bit under 4%, but the states in which it's greater, Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, PA, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, West Virginia, Texas, and Indiana, where Indiana is an extremely energy intensive state with ranges from 5 to 13% of GDP. If you look at manufacturing overall, you have a similar picture showing the regional hinterland for this industrial resurgence will be in these areas that either have or had a large industrial base. This graph is just meant to show the who are of these states, how much energy are they using, and this is the largest state in the union as far as energy use is the great state of Texas at about a little bit less than 2.5 quads per year in industrial consumption. The blue is primary natural gas, the red is primary coal, which is essentially coke and other industrial uses, electricity sales, and for the most part, the industrial hinterland of the United States is dependent on coal generation, and that's shown by the red line. Even in Texas, a very gas-intensive state, it's still 30%. It only drops to meaningless levels when you get to California. What is the gas share generation? Gas share generation in the industrial belt in the United States is minimal. Less than 20% everywhere but Pennsylvania. Texas, it's near 50%. In Georgia and Alabama, it's in the 30s. Louisiana, 50%. And of course, it's quite high in California. So if there's going to be displacement of coal by natural gas, it's going to be in the Midwest, primarily. And so the displacement of coal by natural gas will be a large chunk of natural gas demand. These large plants that Martha talked about will also embed chunks of natural gas demand. When I say chunks, I'm talking TCFs of natural gas demand. And so as we heard yesterday, we have a glut of the supply here in this region of the country. Everybody wants to get the methane out, whether to Canada. We are integrated primarily with Ontario in the manufacturing world, to the east to ship out to Europe through Philadelphia, to the Midwest back to Chicago, and to the Gulf Coast. So part of the problem for ethane for producers here is that they don't have enough, we don't have any storage of the NGLs in the area. We'd like to get some. As there's an incentive to ship it to where they can use it, which is the Gulf Coast. But the regional developers here are saying, why would I want to ship the ethane down to Houston, have them make ethylene and bring it back up here so I can make something else? And so that's the competition between the ethane-based producers here and the both ethane and naphtha users down in the Gulf Coast. But the optimistic story is that there's enough for everybody. And then we have, that was methane, and a similar story for NGLs. We're trying to integrate both to the export world and to existing industrial users of NGLs. And so the promise of the shale gas is to not let that spike happen again. These are in capacity additions of natural gas power, which is the use of natural gas. It increased from 50 to 250 gigawatts in 10 years, all the while the gas price rose. Now there are other reasons, but they're associated with it. Because of the shale gas phenomenon, the next 50 gigawatts didn't matter to the natural gas price, it fell. We expect 50 to 100 gigawatts of coal going away depending on what happens with environmental regulations and natural gas prices. Every 50 gigawatts is another 2.5 TCF of natural gas demand. So what the industrial resurgence is riding on is the supply elasticity of the shale gas. Whether it's here in the Marcellus region, associated gas in Bakken and Eagle Ford, or where have you, that's the basis of our industry going forward. Thank you.
All right, and now we have Tom Duesterberg.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having a historian address this group of august economists. We've heard the micro story about the industrial resurgence or renaissance. The terms seem to be interchangeable. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a macro sense about the manufacturing resurgence, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about oil. I've done some work on crude oil production and the impact on the overall manufacturing sector. I want to start by telling you about an anecdote from my life as a trade association leader in Washington. It's about 10 or 15 years ago. I had my board meeting of CEOs of manufacturing companies, and I had as my featured speaker after dinner one night the chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, very eminent economist who will go unnamed. But it was at the time, at the height of the pessimism about the manufacturing sector.